In a small town nestled deep in the northern state, where each day brought only monotonous routine and silence, something terrible happened that left a mark on the hearts of its inhabitants. The Smith family, consisting of Father John, Mother Elizabeth, and their only daughter Emma, lived in an old house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by quiet woods. Mr. Smith worked as a traffic officer. Mrs. Smith took care of the household, and Emma, their little girl, played with her toys and drew in her room. One evening, when Mr. Smith went to work, Mrs. Smith and Emma stayed home. Everything was normal until they started hearing strange sounds from the forest outside their window. At first, they dismissed it as simple natural noise, but the sounds grew louder and more unnatural. Mrs. Smith decided to check what was happening, leaving Emma to play in her room. It was dark outside, and she couldn't see anything suspicious. Returning to the house, she decided to ignore the strange sounds, thinking it was just forest animals. However, when Mr. Smith returned home, he found their daughter missing. They searched the entire house but found no trace of Emma. There were no signs of invasion or violence in their home. They called the police, but no clues were found. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but Emma never returned. The Smith family remained in the same house, but they never felt safe again. Every rustle in the forest outside reminded them of their lost daughter and the uncertainty of what happened to her. One day, when Mr. Smith decided to explore the surroundings in search of any clues, he stumbled upon a strange note abandoned in the woods not far from their house. It contained something incomprehensible but seemed to be addressed to them. It made them wonder what could be related to Emma's disappearance. Mr. Smith began his own investigation, searching the surroundings and exploring every corner of the forest. One day he discovered strange tracks leading to an abandoned building deep in the woods. It was an old and eerie structure that seemed abandoned and forgotten. Not believing his luck, Mr. Smith decided to enter. Everything around was covered in cobwebs and dust. The building looked abandoned and forsaken, but something made him keep moving forward. Ascending to the second floor, he found a strange altar surrounded by candles and symbols he had never seen before. And then he heard whispers, muffled and mysterious, as if calling to something sinister. He approached closer and saw a group of people standing around the altar, and in the middle was a girl whom he immediately recognized as his daughter, Emma. She was pale and lifeless, as if frozen in time. With horror, he realized that Emma had been a victim of some strange ritual. He rushed forward, shouting her name, but it was already too late. He took her body in his arms, feeling the pain piercing his heart. It was at that moment that the police arrived, which Mr. Smith managed to call when he discovered the abandoned building. They caught the cultists by surprise, and they were arrested. Despite the cult being dismantled, Emma was already lost. The Smith family left that town, but the pain and sorrow always remained with them. This story became a warning to others, reminding them that there are dark forces in the world that can threaten the most precious things. The Johnson family decided to move to a new house on the outskirts of town. After months of searching, they finally found the perfect place for their new life. The house was old, but perfectly suitable for living. It stood surrounded by a beautiful park and seemed like a secluded and peaceful place to relax after a hard day's work and school. The first few days in the new house went smoothly. The family settled in, explored the surroundings, and enjoyed the fresh air. However, soon after they moved in, strange things began to happen. On the first evening, when everyone had already gone to bed, the youngest daughter, Emma, heard strange noises in her room. She sat up in bed, listening intently to the sounds. It was something unusual, unlike the usual sounds of the house. The noises grew louder, and she felt her heart beating faster. She decided she needed to tell her parents about it, but when she left her room, the noises stopped. She searched the entire house but found nothing suspicious. Returning to her room, she went to sleep, but her heart still raced, and she couldn't calm down. The next morning, she told her parents about the strange noises, but they didn't pay much attention, thinking it was just her imagination. However, as time went on, strange events began to occur more frequently. Doors started opening and closing on their own, objects moved around in the kitchen, and sometimes they heard strange sounds coming from the basement. The family became nervous and tense, casting wary glances at each other, trying to find an explanation for these strange occurrences. They decided to ask the neighbors if they had encountered anything similar, but all the neighbors claimed that nothing unusual had happened in their area. The family felt more and more isolated, feeling like no one could help them. One evening, when Tom and Alice were gathered with Emma in the living room to discuss what to do next, they heard a sound that made them freeze with terror. It was a piercing scream coming from the basement. Their hearts pounding with fear, they knew they had to act. Tom grabbed a flashlight, and Alice took her phone to call the police. They decided to go down to the basement and check what was happening while they waited for the police to arrive. As they entered the basement, they found it dark and eerie. The sounds had stopped, and they heard only their own footsteps. They began to search every corner until they stumbled upon a door covered in thick layers of dust. Tom opened the door, and they discovered an old room inside. In the corner of the room sat a man who looked menacing. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, and he emitted strange sounds reminiscent of mournful moans. The Johnson family was horrified. They didn't know what to do. They tried to ask him who he was and what he was doing here, but he continued to make strange sounds and glare at them menacingly. At that moment, the police arrived, and they were rescued from the horror. The man was arrested and taken to the local police station for questioning. Later, they learned that he was the brother of the previous owner of the house, who had lived here. He was insane, and his soul was trapped in this house. He was trying to scare the family away because he didn't want anyone else to live here. The Johnson family was grateful to the police for their help and felt safe again. They decided to stay in their home despite everything that had happened, but they would never forget this terrifying experience, and it would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Strange things began to happen in a small town surrounded by green hills and peaceful fields. At first, these were just rumors, but as more and more local residents disappeared, the atmosphere of tension and fear increased. There were only a few police officers working in the town, and they were anxiously watching the situation, but unfortunately they could not find any evidence or traces indicating what was happening to the missing people. Rumors and speculation began to reach more and more citizens. Some assumed that it could be a person coming from outside, while others claimed that a crazy maniac lived in the city. While they doubted and argued, new disappearances continued to occur. First, an old woman disappeared from the suburbs, then a young guy from a local bar, then another local disappeared, and so on. The situation became more and more tense every day. Many residents of the city began to close their doors at night and avoid going outside after sunset. Some even considered leaving the city and moving somewhere else. At this time, a new policeman, David Miller, arrived in the city. He was young and ambitious, and he was quickly promoted to the position of inspector. He was determined and persistent, and immediately took over the investigation of the loss. David conducted a number of interrogations and collected information about each disappearance. He found that in each case, the missing people have recently been seen together with the same person, a local fisherman and retired cop named Jack Smith. David decided to find out the truth and went to question Jack. But when he came to his house, he found that his door was open and the inside was empty. He carefully examined the surroundings and noticed a strange trail leading to a small forest more often nearby. Without hesitation, he went in this direction, driven by intuition. As he approached the forest, he began to hear muffled screams and noise. He accelerated his steps and soon went out to a small house in the forest, where he found a terrifying picture. In the house, Jack Smith held several prisoners who were tied and chained. They shouted and begged for help, but Jack was adamant. He stood in front of them, smiling madly and making strange sounds. David was shocked. He couldn't believe that the man he considered as a colleague could commit such terrible crimes. He immediately ordered his employees to arrest Jack and release the prisoners. Later, they discovered that Jack was suffering from a mental disorder, and he perceived his victims as his enemies. He kept them imprisoned, trying to find a way to avenge them for what he thought they had done to him. Jack was arrested and convicted of a series of kidnappings and murders. His fate was the subject of wide discussion in the city, and the residents felt mixed feelings, a seed of relief and horror. They were grateful to police officer David for his decisive actions and for being able to bring the maniac to justice. The families and friends of the missing people were very shocked by what happened, but they were glad that justice had been restored and that Jack would no longer be able to harm anyone. For David Miller, this investigation was a real test. He realized that the world can be much more dangerous than it seems, and that even the most innocent faces can hide terrible secrets. After the end of the investigation, David decided to stay in the city and continue to serve its residents. He felt that it was his duty to protect them from any threats, whether from outside or from within. The story of a crazy policeman who terrorized a small city was a warning to everyone who believed that there was no danger in such quiet places. She reminded everyone that evil can penetrate anywhere, and that it is important to be always vigilant and ready for action.